You there! Yes, you. My sources tell me you're interested in Guild Wars 2. Well, you've come to the right video. Interested in exploring exotic lands? We've got you covered. Want to feel the rush of charging into battle? Look no further. Perhaps you're more interested in experiencing the pain of loss firsthand, or feeling the wind in your hair, or even making friends. Whatever your reason, we're happy you're here. Isn't that right, Ritlock?
Go away.
Oh, don't worry about him, he's just shy. I've even heard that he purrs in his sleep. Well, enough preamble, let's jump into the video. Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name's of course Seesaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Guild Wars 2 in 2020. Today we're specifically answering the question, is it too late to get into Guild Wars 2? And this is a question that's been coming up more and more, specifically as we've had some popular streamers and YouTubers covering the game. Now, just before we get into the main body of this video, I should mention that I am an ArenaNet or Guild Wars 2 partner. Now, does this mean I won't say anything bad about Guild Wars 2? No, in fact, in this video, I'm going to cover some of the positives as well as the negatives of joining the game in 2020. What it does mean, though, is that there are some links in the comments below. Those links are sponsored by ArenaNet, and it does help out the channel if you do use them to either try the free game or to buy the expansions. With that said, let's dive into the video. Now, I've been seeing a lot of people, specifically in the comments of some of my other Guild Wars 2 videos, asking if it is too late to jump into the game, specifically as Guild Wars 2 is an MMO, and it's kind of hard to jump in knowing that there are people who have played this and progressed for many, many years, and whether or not you'll be so far behind them that it's not even worth joining in. And this is specifically the case for a lot of people who are trying to join and have maybe some friends that they want to play with, but those friends have been playing for a long time and might have a lot of experience with the game. Well, Guild Wars 2 actually is a game that's pretty easy to join into, and I'll tell you why. Simply put, the game focuses on horizontal progression as opposed to vertical progression. And what I mean by this is in other games, let's use World of Warcraft as an example, as you go through the game, you become more powerful. You gain item level and stats, and you keep growing up and up and up and up, and eventually you might get a stat squish and get knocked all the way down, but as time goes on, you keep going up. And with games like this, there are certain points where you can join the game and certain points where you can join the game and it's a lot harder to catch up. A notable situation is at the start of an expansion when things tend to reset, when there are these squishes, it's a lot easier for new players to join and feel like they're on an even playing field. In contrast, Guild Wars 2 has a horizontal progression system. Yes, there is a bit of a vertical progression where you do get levels all the way up to level 80, and you do equip new gear all the way up to Ascended, or Legendary, which is the same stat quality, as well as some infusions, but once you have hit that top, there is a pretty steady, flat bar that continues with your progress. And that's where the game turns into Fashion Wars, which is something you might have heard, where people are progressing in different ways through costumes, as well as other specific ways to make your character more interesting, such as mounts, such as gliding and different masteries. But that's something that, doesn't really impact you as a player. It does impact you in certain ways, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty a little bit further in this video. The big takeaway from this is that it's actually pretty easy for new players to catch up to existing players in terms of raw power. Yes, there are other factors such as experience and the way you do your rotations and the way you build your class that might separate you from another more experienced player, but in terms of actually having the proper gear and feeling like you have the tools to get the job done, you should be able to catch up a lot quicker in Guild Wars 2 compared to a lot of other MMOs. So I guess the only possibly better time to join the game would be if they do release a Guild Wars 3, which would essentially be a whole new game, resetting the power of many of the players, but no one knows if that's ever actually going to happen, or even when it could happen if it does happen, so you'd kind of just be waiting around forever. And I think it's definitely better to join into something that is good and fun right now, as opposed to hoping for something to happen one day. If you are a completely new player and you are deciding whether or not to give the game a try, I already kind of mentioned this at the very start of the video, there is a free version of the base game, which does allow you to get a pretty good experience of what the game's like. Yes, there are certain limitations, as most free versions of a game would have, but this is a very, very generous free version of the game. You get to experience a lot of what the game has to offer, and then make a better decision as to whether or not you would enjoy this experience. It does allow you also to catch up a lot in terms of player power before making that purchase decision as well. That being said, one of the questions you should be asking is, should you be rushing to the max level or to the end game? One of the biggest issues I have with the current world of MMOs is the theory that the game doesn't start until you get to the end game, and that is more true in certain games than other games, but overall, I think that pressure to rush to the end game is what ruins the gameplay experience for a lot of new players, because instead of being focused on the actual world you're exploring, all the beauty, all the people you come across, and all the interesting little interactions you might have, you're just rushing through each place. You're trying to find the most optimized way to get to max level, to get the best gear, and you miss a lot of the different things that make a certain game special. Now, one of the other big questions I am always asked when people are looking to join Guild Wars 2 is whether or not you need the expansions to enjoy the game. And there are two answers to this. Number one, if you're looking to just try the game and see if you enjoy it, well, no, you don't need the expansions to do that. You can definitely see if you like the art style, if you like the general topics of the story, the combat system. You can see a lot of this just from the free base game, and it does give you a really good view of how the game works. Now, if you're someone who is joining and trying to play with friends, that might be another story, because you might want to do some of the activities that are locked behind the expansion. And I think it's fair that certain activities would be locked behind an expansion, but it's definitely one of the harder barriers of entry for certain new players, because you could join this free game hoping to do all these fun activities with a bunch of friends, just to find out that, hey, you don't have this unlocked, or you don't have this specific job unlocked that you wanted to play, and it does limit your options a bit. In addition to the actual content being locked behind expansions, there are also certain things called elite specs that do give your classes the ability to perform different tasks that you won't have access to unless you have the expansion unlocked. And this can come into play if you are wanting to do a certain role on your character. For instance, if you are playing as a ranger and you really want to heal your friends, well, you're probably going to want to unlock druid before you can do that. So there are little things like that to consider before going ahead and thinking that you're going to be able to do that on the free account. So there are little limitations like that that might push you to want to get the expansions, but they're by no means required to just get a taste for the game. And in terms of the expansions, I think they're a pretty reasonable price. You definitely get a fair bit of content for the amount you're going to purchase, and you're just purchasing this and not having to pay a reoccurring fee, which is a huge plus in general for Guild Wars 2. The one big issue, though, that I will draw attention to is that certain Living World content is not unlocked by the purchase of the expansion. And for those of you who are new and don't even know what Living World is, the big thing that Guild Wars 2 does is it releases a new Living World piece of content roughly every 3 months, and if you are an active player and you're there for when it's released, you get access to that piece of content, and you get to always access it in the future because you were there when it was released. The issue, though, is if you don't log in during the time that it is an active piece of content, which is from when it launches to when the next piece of content launches, you don't get access to that chapter in the Living World story. And with that, you might have to go and unlock it in some different way. The main way of doing this is by purchasing it through the gem store. Now, the big benefit for Guild Wars 2 is that you can actually convert in-game gold to gems, and because of that, you can purchase pretty much anything you want in the gem store just by working for it in game. So if you're someone who's really trying to limit how much real world money you're pumping into a game, that is a big plus. But it does leave a few new players feeling a bit about the game when you do go ahead and purchase the expansions, feeling like you're ready to dive on in, just to realize you don't have the specific map that you wanted because it's part of a Living World story. And yeah, it can feel a bit unfortunate, but I would just make sure you definitely do your research to see, what's included with what before you make that purchase decision. This also becomes a bigger issue for future story content, as new players might not know certain characters because they did not play the certain Living World episode. And because of that, future story content is made less enjoyable just because you don't know the characters and you have to do a lot of research, sometimes out of game, to discover their origin story and why they are so important to the mission. So it can make the whole new player experience a little bit muddy, and it is something to pay attention to when you are joining the game. So I think I've done a pretty good job of highlighting some of the easier reasons you can get caught up in Guild Wars 2 and some of the harder, more negative aspects of getting caught up, but one thing I haven't really discussed is how you actually go ahead and catch up. Well, there are a few different ways. I think often when you do purchase the expansions, you get access to a character booster, so if you're someone who does just want to get into the action and play with friends, that's definitely an approach you can take. I'm a firm believer that you should take your time and just sort of explore the different characters. The main reason for this is that you should kind of try out a few different classes to see which one you enjoy before you sink a bit of time into getting gear for them. Now, the really nice thing in Guild Wars 2 is that most of the gear in game is account bound as opposed to bound to a single character. So if you do work on, say, a engineer to begin with, and you do a bunch of raids or fractals or whatever to get some ascended gear that's leather gear, and you decide, hey, I actually want to play on a ranger or something like that, well, you can use that gear on your ranger. You just might have to invest a bit of gold and time to change the stats on it to work for your ranger, but otherwise you can just transfer that right over. So it's a really nice thing that way, and it does allow players to kind of explore different classes, and that's kind of a big expectation as you get sort of further into the end game of Guild Wars 2, that you might need to switch up to a different class to kind of help your group progress through different pieces of content. For instance, if you show up one night and there's already like a bunch of healers or a bunch of a specific type of DPS, you might want to switch to a different class to provide a unique buff or a unique sort of asset to your team. All this said, if you are a new player interested in the game, I definitely recommend trying out the free version of the game, as it does give you a good window into what it's like to play. Just take your time, enjoy what the game has to offer, and progress at whatever pace you feel like you want to progress. And don't get too hung up on trying to catch up to the top level people, because before long you will get there. As I said, it is a horizontal progression system, and soon enough you'll just be at the top and doing your own thing anyways. But yeah guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did find it helpful, please consider tossing it a like, and if you're interested in Guild Wars 2 and other MMO content, please consider subscribing to the channel. We primarily focus on MMO and MMO comparisons, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. But with all that said, I will see you in the next video.